Hello, everyone. My name is Sevin Yeltekin. I'm the Dean of Simon Business School, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar where I will be moderating a panel of Simon Business School alumni and professionals in financial services and real estate, who will be sharing their experiences and insights with equity, diversity, and inclusion as they specifically pertain to their particular industry. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the Simon YouTube channel. And we want to make sure that you have the full recording and have access to it, and you're welcome to, of course, share it with your network. EDI has received increased exposure in mainstream awareness and is currently regarded as a matter of considerable importance in the corporate sector. What has gone under-recognized and under-emphasized is the economic value that exists when EDI is successfully integrated into an organization. We see an increasing number of studies that provide evidence that more diverse organizations are more effective organizations. We see strong positive correlation between measures of EDI and traditional measures of corporate and organizational performance, such as profitability, ROI, and shareholder return. In other words, EDI is an underutilized tool in the corporate toolkit that can be used to boost corporate performance. Maximizing the efficiency of EDI is an opportunity to create value in your organizations. As many of you are aware, Simon has been recognized as one of the top business schools in the United States. Simon recently ranked number 25 best overall business school by Bloomberg Business Week, which acknowledges our ability to provide a cutting edge and relevant MBA curriculum that develops global managerial talent and teach global engagement strategies based on the foundations of collaboration and innovation. We equip our graduates to recognize and adapt to a changing marketplace, understand best management practices, and make decisions in the face of ambiguity. Not coincidentally, Simon has also been ranked as the most diverse MBA program in the US News and World Report. In fact, this is the result of intentional and deliberate efforts that accrued over 50 years of an evolving strategy advocating for the principles of EDI. Even before the concept of EDI or DEI, whichever acronym one uses, came to be understood as it currently is. Not only were we driven by the moral and social imperative, but Simon's deep understanding of economics, combined with an intensive quantitative focus and cohesive evidence-based approach and decision-making, allowed us to really understand the patterns and to recognize the framework that underlines and justifies EDI as a business case. Our aim as a business school is to probe, ask questions, learn, and educate. And to do that, we help connect the dots between theory, research, and actual business practices. While almost every major corporation and institution certainly purports to recognize the importance of EDI, not all of them are able to implement an effective strategy and are unable to realize the full benefits of such initiatives. This can result in the notion that EDI initiatives are not a good utilization of organizational resources, but execution matters and matters very much. We hope this panel discussion will impart what does and doesn't work in implementing EDI initiatives and the considerations and challenges specific to the financial services industry and the outcomes that can be traced back to EDI initiatives. By the end of this session, you will have the tools to create a roadmap that will allow you to leverage your own deep familiarity with EDI through your experiences at Simon and outside, and carry out effective EDI initiatives at your own organization. We've structured today's session so that we will reserve some time at the end for your questions and answers. So please use the Q&A function to pose your questions. You can do that throughout the moderated session as well. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelist. Efrain Rivera, MBA graduate, 1989, SVP, CFO, and Treasurer at Paychex. Efrain, hello and welcome. Daniel Bonga, MBA candidate, 2022. Daniel, hello and welcome to you too. And Justin Grant, MBA candidate also of 2022. And hello and welcome to you too. I'd like to ask each of you to please say a few words about yourself. We'll start with Efrain.
Hi, thanks. Pleasure to be on this in this discussion, and thanks for the opportunity to share some of my experiences. I have been at a company called Paychex. Paychex is an interesting company that's undergone a significant transformation in the last 10 years, certainly the time I have been here, and it lies at the intersection of technology, business services, and is very deeply involved with financial services related to small and medium-sized enterprises. We're about a $40 billion or so enterprise. In the last decade, we've doubled our revenues, more than tripled our market cap, and have been on a journey to that really has driven all aspects of business performance. Prior to being at Paychex, I was the CFO of another company in the life sciences called Bausch & Lomb, also local here, and had a lot of experience working internationally, where I spent much of my career. So pleasure, a real honor to be part of this discussion.
Welcome and thank you. And Daniel?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dean Yeltekin, for giving me the opportunity to join this panel. Daniel Bonga, originally from Sierra Leone. I did my entire tertiary education here at the U of R, did electrical and computer engineering in undergrad, got a master's degree in technical entrepreneurship and management, and I am back doing my MBA in corporate finance. I mainly enrolled at Simon to enable a career pivot to finance, and after an insightful 6-year in tech, I spent the summer doing a corporate finance internship at Procter & Gamble, and I will be returning next summer to work in a full-time capacity as a senior finance manager. It's a privilege to be here today. I'm very happy to share my experience and perspective as a Simon student, but also someone that's about to enter the workforce again.
Thank you, Daniel. And Justin?
Yes, hello, everyone. My name is Justin Grant. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. I went to Alabama A&M University, where I graduated with a bachelor's in civil engineering. And upon there, I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina to start my career in management consulting at Accenture. I worked within business and systems integration across our health and public service sectors and clients. I knew that I wanted to go into marketing and make a pivot because I also am the co-founder of an educational nonprofit with my twin brother, and it's called Siamese Dreams Next Level Outreach. And so through that experience and through the initiatives that we put together, it just really spurred me to go into marketing, and that's what kind of made me want to attend Simon. I knew that Simon was a great program, very intimate program, and very known for diversity, as well as just a challenge with the rigorous coursework. And so I wanted to challenge myself, and that's what brought me to Simon. So I am currently a second-year student concentrating in marketing. This summer, I had the great opportunity of interning at American Express in their global consumer services group, marketing group. And so I had a wonderful experience, and I also was offered the full-time opportunity to come back. And so I will be joining them upon graduation. So I am also just really grateful to be in this conversation and share my thoughts, and just thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Well, welcome to all three of you. And so let's start a little bit with our sort of almost graduates to get a little bit of a glimpse out of them about, as you have, I hear the engineering background, I hear sort of the pivot to the financial industry. As you came into the financial industry, what sort of surprised you about the financial industry's perhaps particular take on EDI issues? Was there a difference from what you had experienced before? Was it different from what you were experiencing at Simon? So you could give us a little bit, maybe Justin, if you start, and we'll have Daniel jump in as well there.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I guess coming into the financial services industry, and these are, I guess, completely my thoughts, that it was more rigid, I guess, in a sense of the framework of the organization, how it ran, and people that were in charge, and just the whole organizational structure. However, when I got to the organization, it really not just surprised me, but it welcomed me, and I really enjoyed it because I saw the diversity across. I saw leadership across the board that were of different races and ethnicities, and so I can relate that back to Simon, which has very diverse people in our program. And we work cross-functionally across, not only in the workforce, but also at Simon, working in cross-functional teams. And we have our core teams with, different people of all races and ethnicities. So it really just gave a comfort level to working there. And also just to see the, just like we have at Simon, the affinity groups that you can join. It's also the same thing in the work environment. There were, Black affinity groups, there were Hispanic affinity groups, there were Indian affinity groups, anything that you wanted to join to kind of make yourself feel comfortable and also just involved and included in the atmosphere, in the work environment. So that is something that I wouldn't necessarily surprise me, but it was grateful. It was good to see.
Great. Daniel, was that a similar experience for you, or is there other elements?
Yeah, it was pretty much a similar experience, and I don't want to repeat what Justin already mentioned. However, I think for me, as far as the organizational framework of finance, I worked in consulting as well, starting at IBM and also at Corning, did international assignments working in China, in South Africa, and in Nigeria. So I was privileged to really understand from a cultural perspective, when you're working in China, what it means to be in a specific role, especially technical roles. Do you see more males versus females? And the same approach also applies in Africa. I worked in Nigeria and South Africa. What's the cultural dynamic like? And then that's different from the United States, where business is less relationship based and more objective driven. So I think that for me was the thought that I came with, pivoting into finance. But then when I got into finance, especially at Simon, I don't want to repeat what Justin mentioned, but I think diversity, number one, we got the ranking as number one in the US as the most diverse program. And I was able to see that in reality. It's less about seeing most males. So if you think maybe investment banking or different roles in finance, it's all about the 50-50. You see as many females as males. And when I went to Procter & Gamble, which is not necessarily a financial services industry, a marketing company, but you see the same thing in the corporate finance space as far as what does the leadership look like? What does the senior vice president leadership look like? I mean, we look at the racial profile or even the ethnic or gender profile, it's almost balanced. So I think for me, I had this thought, like this cultural perspective, and then shifting into finance, some of it has been a confirmation. I mean, others, pretty much has been a learning experience for me.
Yeah. So Efrain, is that different from when you started in the financial industry, or some of these sort of obviously kind of industries that are adjacent to it in your career? Has it changed? The perspectives have changed, as when we're talking about affinity groups, we're talking about representation that Justin and Daniel are seeing, which has probably evolved over time. So maybe.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting. First thing I would say is that someone told me very early in my career that, and I don't know if it's a threat or a statement of fact, but they said to me, it takes many people to make a career, one to break it. I think there was an implicit threat there somewhere, but I took the many people to make a career. And I would say I would not be where I am and had the experiences that I've had without many people. That's the first thing that I would say. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is that when I was at Bausch & Lomb, we had a very deliberate program. This is going back 20, 25 years ago, to bring people of color into what we called the high potential pool. So it was a group of people that was selected. It was a combination of people of color and an attempt to add gender diversity. I would say almost everyone in that program went on to pretty significant roles in that company or in another. And it was a tremendous learning to me around how it is that you nurture talent. You simply don't do it. You don't wake up one day and say, we want to be diverse. It's part of a programmatic, systematic effort. You mentioned earlier at the beginning, Shavin, that the Simon School's emphasis on diversity is not a one-year program. It's been a multi-year effort. And that's basically, if you want to create lasting change, that's the way you do it. I simply don't get here unless there are lots of people who help me, and there are programs that recognize talent. I was fortunate enough to be there. I would say what's happened, over the last 20 or 25 years is we've gone in waves. And I would say 20 to 25 years ago, there was a lot of emphasis. It coincided with some census data that suggested by the year 2050, the US was going to be what was called at the time majority minority, which is kind of funny to me, term. But the idea was going to be that there would be more non-white people, based on what the census was saying, than there were white. Now it's turned out that that's true. In some ways, I'd say we may be even faster there. Right. But I do think that there was a lot of emphasis at that point, and then it seemed to go into a lull. It almost seemed like there wasn't as much emphasis. And I would say this, the broader context of what's going on is that corporations and a lot of the social issues that came to the fore in the last year or two have really spurred a new wave of social activism at the corporate level. It's interesting. It's no longer, and my boss and I discuss this quite frequently, it's no longer acceptable simply to put your head down and do your thing. Right. If in the end, you don't take a stand, especially with your employees, around perceived issues that are affecting society as a whole, George Floyd, et cetera. We don't need to repeat all of those. And then what happened beyond that, I would say, is, and I'm not limiting this just to the business services technology industries that I'm in, but I think it's broader. I also happen to sit on the board of a global real estate firm now. I think that everyone is searching for the right way to address issues of diversity, inclusion, and two things have really kind of, I would say, supercharged the conversation. The first one is the increasing emphasis among investors on issues of ESG. So, right. EDI and ESG are different, but they occupy a similar space. The other acronym used is CSR, corporate social responsibility. All of those kind of coalesce to say business has a role to play here, and what role will they choose to play? So that's the first part. And then the second part that I would say really was a significant accelerate of efforts was NASDAQ's decision last year to say, if you are a NASDAQ listed company, we are, many of the tech firms in the country don't have a great record, by the way, on diversity issues, and are waking up to that issue. If you are listed, you have to have a certain amount of people on the board that represent diverse groups. I would say when that happened, interestingly enough, to me, my phone rang off the hook. It was very clear now that people took it seriously and were looking to figure out how to diversify at the board level. When you're hitting that level of influence in organization, a movement has started to become really quite critical. Final point that I would make. This goes back 15 or 20 years. I'm Hispanic, Latinx. I would say it was very clear that there were markets in the country that were underserved and frankly misunderstood that now are dominant markets. You look in entertainment, you look in consumer goods, et cetera. And so we have evolved to that kind of society, that kind of market, and to ignore these issues is to do so at your peril, because increasingly you will be out of the mainstream of economic activity in the country. So I think all of those issues are really important issues that have gained steam, I would say, in the last 5 to 7 years, even though they were there a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit completely the nail on multiple heads, and we hear from, on the one side, it's the talent management to sort of not tap into our sort of diverse talent that we have, whether it's on the gender side, whether it's on the ethnic, racial, international, socioeconomic side, is to leave talent on. You mentioned how this group of people that had gone through this particular program, how well they had done, right? And we, at the end of the day, a lot of us, and even I as a business school, is on the talent management spectrum, right? This is what we do, trying to bring in talent, foster talent, and then hopefully that talent goes out there and adds value to whatever organization that they choose on. And I hear from Daniel and Justin that seeing that sort of structure, whether it's the affinity groups, whether it's the representation, all of those things really matter about where you, as talented newcomers to the industry, you make your choice, right? You have choices, and you want to make that choice where you want to be, where your talent is utilized and certainly adds value. And that economic sort of, whether it's the markets we can reach, whether it's the talent we can utilize, is exactly the kind of in addition to the moral and social imperative, is the economic imperative that is really changing this. So if we wanted to sort of talk a little bit about, how do I put an EDI kind of strategy together? We talked about some of these elements. We could have these groups, we could have representation at the boards, but just sort of putting us through the elements of that. And I'll start with you, Efrain, and then we can move to Daniel and Justin as well. What are the steps one can follow? What are the big rabbit holes that we should try to avoid? What is instrumental?
Yeah, good point. I do want to put a plug in for Simon and the process. I would say that part you mentioned, toolkit. EDI is a toolkit. I would say Simon gave me a lot of tools when I walked out of the doors a while ago, and I don't think again that I'd be where I am without that toolkit. But with respect to EDI, DEI, early on the conversation was about put together the business case. I remember having conversation after conversation about, well, what is the business case? What is the business case, et cetera. I think we're beyond the business case conversation for lots of the reasons, including the ones that you mentioned. I think this is a unique environment for talent. And I think actually it's the advantage is to the talent in this market. There is a lot of opportunity. I would say in terms of my experience, this is probably the best environment in terms of for talent that I've seen really in my career. So I think that the case really is around building the right talent pool within the organization. Mm-hmm. And I think for most organizations, that's where the conversation starts. Years ago, it was much more about, okay, well, what's the ROI of having a more diverse workforce, et cetera. I think that for most people, especially I would say in industries that are more innovation focused, all businesses are, some more than others. I think it's that's where you can create an imperative, and then the question becomes, are your efforts effective? Because at the end of the day, if they are not effective, you have to step back and say, what am I doing that's not causing it to work? And I think it's a lot less about whether the goal or the objective is the correct one. The question then becomes, what do I need to do to tap into the talent that I've got? Because as we are fond of saying, we're in the human resources industry too, we touch that, there's a war for talent out there. I don't think you need to make that case very strongly, and most people will start nodding their heads.
Yeah. And I want to throw the question at Daniel and Justin. You want to add something about frameworks? I mean, we've always taught Simon as both kind of an analytical approach to, to issues and problems, but at the same time, Daniel, I think it was you who mentioned sort of this experience that you have within team frameworks, right? That you really get to do this in real time within the Simon education. How are those things sort of, a confluence of events or experiences can help shape designing that strategy?
Yeah, I would say at a much more lower level, we have been equipped with a lot of frameworks. The Matrix Insight is one of them. We also have the FACT framework. And in a strategy beyond market class that I'm currently taking, we have Barron's 4I. So essentially what that is as companies looking at non-market strategies or non-market issues that may impact not just their profitability, but also their reputation. So you look at what the issue is and who are the interests involved, what information can we gather to generate enough market action, and lastly, what institutions can we utilize to effect change. But I think for me, the one that is most applicable is the Matrix Insight. And what Matrix Insight does is it enables you to understand team dynamics. One example will be you have interaction styles like chart the course. You also have interaction styles like folks that don't want to take the lead. They're more of a follower. So the value that I obtained from that is to be able to appreciate cultural differences, to also be able to appreciate personality differences as well. Because I think that's where it starts at the very lower level, from the smallest teams to the largest organizations. If I can appreciate, say a colleague that, works in one way based on their cultural construct, I can tell you, I'm from Sierra Leone. When I'm working, I normally, would want to do less of delegating and be more of a follower. Now that's based on my cultural construct. But now, I've changed that construct to more being a decision maker if you're going to be a business leader. So the point is that if a manager does not understand that about me, you may say, I don't need that individual in this team because they don't provide the value that I need as far as driving productivity. But if you are able to understand the Matrix Insight, understand the different interaction styles, then you can appreciate the value that a team member brings to your team. So that's where I think I'll say one can start at a much more lower level to effect change from a diversity or EDI perspective.
Yeah, that's certainly, I'm glad to hear about these, because a lot of times I think for folks who are trying to make these changes, it's a little bit of it's change management, because you're changing perspectives, the way you do business, the importance of why we want to do that. It's at the same time, changes usually has a lot of discomfort and that's hard to manage. And there's also personalities and approaches to manage that as well. It's good to hear about these sort of tried and true approaches that can be extremely helpful. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel and go back to this, to base one to be able to do that. But because it's change for a lot of organizations, because it's different, and organizations have many different sort of objectives. One is likely to encounter, and often does, roadblocks and some resistance. So what are the ways in which we can what are the common roadblocks, and what are the ways, effective strategies to get around those roadblocks? And I can have anybody answer this. Maybe Justin will start with this and go to Efrain.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in. So, and just to kind of tag along to the previous question, I think that was great insight. And I think when it comes to these things, one of the classes that I'm taking right now is negotiations. And in that, we look at different business cases and understand how to effectively negotiate in order to come to a shared agreement. And within that, you speak of roadblocks. There can be disagreements based on cultural constructs and, of how people approach different scenarios. Like if you come from a certain place, you may be more assertive than someone else that is from another place that may be more reserved and more like Daniel said, just would like to follow in some sense. And so it's really just about understanding those personality types and being able to work with them. And that can necessarily be some roadblocks. I know in different frameworks that we've talked about, there are microaggressions that, done, I guess, repeatedly cannot seem so micro. So you kind of look at these things and understand how can I, it's really just all about identifying it, knowing what it is, instead of just brushing it under the rug and saying, this is a part of corporate America. It's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen this way. Instead of just saying, no, I identify that this is a microaggression. How can I, bring this up and, kind of resolve it in a way that is effective and conducive to the atmosphere, of corporate America. So, but also roadblocks are metrics. Oftentimes it's when you ask a question of, what is your business case, like Efrain said, of wanting to have change? Don't we already have EDI in place? Don't we already have these things in place? So they, you need metrics in order to say, in terms of compensation, are people being compensated across the board, whether, whatever your race, gender, your ethnicity is. Also, metrics in terms of hiring. We are able to see that more companies that are diverse are able to have more profitability. And so being able to prove that and being able to know that gives you some type of confidence going into a conversation of saying that, yes, we do need diversity. And if we can increase our diversity by this amount, then we would see this profitability change. And so I think that coming in and being able to address those roadblocks, and like you said, Dean Yeltekin, that it's not being able to be inclusive is viewed also as being hard, like very hard. When people, you ask, it's like, it's just an ongoing battle, which it is, but not necessarily in the way of being hard. It's just uncomfortable. We have to be in charge of being able to have these uncomfortable conversations and, come to the table with a solution instead of just a problem. So I think that those are some of the roadblocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me build on the last two comments. I think, first of all, echo everything that was said. I think those are just really great insights. I will say that I think we're on. My view is we progressed the conversation a bit, but we got a long way to go. I would say that the typical roadblock that I've seen is lack of buy-in from the top. What I mean by lack of buy-in, I don't mean talking about it. I mean taking tangible actions to make it work. I would say that in my time here, give a lot of credit to our CEO. He has made tangible efforts to both diversify the senior management ranks and also put a structure in place, not just talk about it, but put a structure in place that holds managers accountable to some of the metrics that we have set as a company. And so I'm very proud of that. I think you have to do that. It's a journey. You never get there 100%, but if you don't have buy-in from the top, you don't get there. The second thing is not holding the next level down accountable against achieving those metrics. I will say that with my reports, we have those conversations about, here's an opening, what do we do about that? What's the best fit? How do we source the right level of candidates? You never get it right, but if you're not having those intentional conversations, it becomes quite difficult to do so. And I would say just the third, I'll repeat it. I would say hardly a week goes by where we're not talking about the war on talent and the unique confluence of what's occurred with all of the issues in the country and economically, have made this really, really acute. You really have to make sure that you are looking for all of the available talent. And if you don't get it right, your competitor's going to get it right, and you're going to be left behind. And so there's a real competitive effort to this that drives a lot of the business decision making and creates the imperative for getting it right.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Just leaving that talent and untapped, you're certainly not doing any kind of good to the organization as well. But talking about, if we can just expand a little bit on the kind of the measurable goals, Justin, you referred to this, and so did Efrain, of course. What are some of the measurable goals or benchmarks that we want to track that certainly we also want to be transparent about? I mean, sometimes people talk, of course, about the kind of what I would call the representation, right? We look at our demographics and we look at our representation, but this is much more beyond that. And that bringing people inside the door is one thing, but to actually nurture talent and have them reach their potential and add value is a whole other thing. What are some of the metrics? Anybody can jump in at any time that you would find compelling, that you have been engaged with, that you have found to be effective metrics.
I'll just jump in. I would say one of the things that's really important is, and you almost don't get to the second level, but it's really being very intentional about how it is that you source the people who come into the organization. If the funnel is not cast wide enough, if the metrics that you use to define who gets to be at least considered to have a seat on the table, if that's defined too narrowly, you will not be able to progress to the next level. So you really do have to have tight metrics around the shape and the size of the funnel at the entrance, and then ask yourself, what is the next level? If we have a funnel that is creating the right set of opportunities, how is that funnel operating for us? Because if it's not getting you the results that you want, then you have to step back and look at that. I would say I've been involved in, I would say in the last 6 to 9 months, 3 to 4 senior level executive searches, both within the company and outside of the company in other organizations I serve. You really cannot have a search like that unless you are sourcing a significant amount of diverse candidates. It's simply the search is a non-starter there. But then the question becomes, who gets through the funnel? And you have to ask very hard questions about who's getting through the funnel. And then once people are through the funnel, how many people are progressing in the company? Exactly. So there needs to be metrics. All of those steps need to be metric to ensure that you have a process that's actually working. And so when you hire the right candidates, they have a chance, and there's a visibility there to the opportunity to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel and Justin, I mean, maybe Justin, you can jump in too. What are you seeing as a candidate entering into this world and thinking about sort of, how do I assess a company? How do I assess a workplace? And what are some of the metrics you're seeing, or metrics you would like to see that would certainly help you, that this is a company that is really taking the sort of the EDI imperative very, very seriously?
Yes, a few things actually come to mind when listening to what Efrain was saying. Looking at a company structure and looking at the people of color who are in leadership at the company, you'll oftentimes, when I look at different companies, you'll see where kind of at the analyst or kind of beginner levels, that's when you see most people of color. But as you kind of go up the chain of executive vice presidents or C-suite executives, then you'll kind of see there are not many people of color in those roles. It's predominantly people who are not of color. And that will kind of be a sign or a kind of indicator that it may not be a place where it's conducive to be promoted or to have that mentorship or sponsorship that is necessary for one to succeed in an environment. So I do look for that. Another thing is the investment in just people of color, or also in initiatives that are helping people of color. So, and when I say that, I mean just partnering with organizations such as, the consortium, such as Prospanica, these different organizations that are pipelines for, talent pools. And, are you investing in these when the conferences come around? Are you attending these conferences to be a part of attracting this talent? And also within that, when I talk to my colleagues, the biggest thing that I guess we encounter that we talk about is that there are 3 pillars within a company that you really look for. And it's, the hire, retain, and promote. And a lot of companies, they do a great job at hiring. You go to these conferences and you see great talent, and so you hire them to get your numbers. However, to retain them, it's often hard because they, after a while, they don't necessarily feel value for whatever reason, not receiving the workload that they enjoy, or not being able to just do what they enjoy at all. And then also to be promoted. That is kind of like the hardest barrier. We talked about roadblocks, and that will cause someone to feel stagnant. And so those are metrics that can be tracked. And also the investment financially, being able to, I know that a lot of companies during the pandemic were investing in small businesses, which predominantly are owned by minorities, are owned by people of color. And so being able to see that and being able to track that dollar amount being spent are metrics and KPIs that will let you know as an indicator that this is a place that values diversity.
Great. Thank you. That's very helpful. It's actually, it sort of answers one of the questions that's coming up in our chat box as well, where Lynn Emerson asked, as a candidate, right, as you're walking in, and how can you tell from the outside looking in? Because there's sort of, the talk, and there's versus the really putting your money and your efforts where your mouth is, and how does one differentiate? Are there certain clues that you look for, Justin or Daniel, or maybe Efrain as well? Are there certain red flags or maybe good green flags that really, other than representation at the higher levels and kind of seat at the table or mentoring programs? Is there anything else, Daniel?
Yeah, I can jump in, and I completely agree with the comment that Efrain and Justin made. But for me, as far as clues that might be a little nuanced that I look for, and quite frankly, I do this, and I'm going to give an example with Procter & Gamble, is that I look at the 10K, albeit I'm a finance student, so I'll look at the 10K and also look at the MD&A, right? So I want to make sure, because back to Efrain's point, is management at the top accountable, and does it trickle down to the lower level or second level management? But if the company is willing to add that, or EDI strategy in their MD&A, that means a lot to me. And the example for Procter & Gamble is, I don't know how many people are familiar with the talk or the look. These are now, albeit they are a marketing company, but they've been able to effectively use their platforms to champion EDI issues. And the look, which actually won an Emmy, got nominated for an Emmy, is an ad that demonstrated a Black male in a community who happens to be, I believe, a lawyer, but he was at a swimming pool with his son, and everyone in the community just looked at him as the other Black male, right? Up until the point, he would go to a restaurant, nobody wants to associate with him and his son, up until the point when one of the community members went to the court, and it turned out that the Black male was the judge. So that ad generated a lot of conversations globally, and most importantly, nationally, around racial bias. The fact that a company is willing to go that length, not, again, yes, there might be automotives around it, but for me, that was a sell for me. So the point is, to what extent are you willing to go at length to really demonstrate your commitment to EDI issues? And I want to see that if you're a public company, I want to see that in your MD&A. If it's not in your MD&A, it means it's not the most important. So again, that's a nuance. Not everybody will do that, but most finance students are going to be looking for that.
Hey, by the way, I just want to add one thing. Sometimes you'll see it in the financials, but increasingly what companies are doing, for example, we are putting it in something called an ESG or a CSR report. You can find it there too. And it gives you, if they don't do it, that says something about their engagement with shareholders on the issue. But frequently you'll find a lot of those issues addressed in those documents too. So I wanted to broaden a little bit of the scope of where you should look.
Mm-hmm. Those are definitely very helpful tips, and especially helpful given the particular industry focus that we're having here. And I think everybody's sort of comfortable looking at that as well. So Efrain, when you were talking about sort of seeing perhaps an EDI strategy, or at least a more renewed focus or spotlight or resources put in from its inception to its further development, and it can change along the way.
Yeah.
What are some of the short-term benefits you were able to see, and what are some of the long-term benefits you were able to tease out? Maybe you could speak to that, so that those companies, or those of us sort of embarking in those journeys, can kind of recognize and say, oh, okay, and these are some of the positive things that can come along, and I should be able to flag them and understand them.
I guess the first simple one I would say, and then the longer one I'll come back to, is the first basic one is that markets are increasingly diverse. I think we think of the U.S. market as one market, and increasingly it is not one market at all. It is many markets, and I can say to you, or I can say to the listeners that and people watching this WebEx, that if you are going to market to a certain segment of the population, I know my own, there are things that work better and things that will fall completely flat. And whether you're talking about financial services, consumer goods, et cetera. I would say that the very first thing I would say is reaching that point. Now, let me illustrate that with our business. So our business is providing HCM technology, or human capital management technology, and business services to small and medium-sized enterprises. 99% of all businesses in the U.S. fit into that category. But I think earlier, I believe it was Justin was talking about businesses started by people of color. Hispanic entrepreneurship is very, very high. And so what we found was we didn't have an effective way to service those customers. So what a number of people in the company did, our marketing efforts were terrific. We created a specialized group within the company to service Latino, Hispanic, Latinx customers, and it's been very, very successful, both on the sales side and on the service side. Well, if someone at the table doesn't even know that issue exists, you're never going to address it. So that's just one short-term issue that you can think about, that where diversity pays off both in very concrete bottom line terms. But I would say the second point, and this is more born of my experience globally, I think it's fantastic. I believe it was Daniel that talked about doing business in China. I had the pleasure of living outside the U.S. I've lived outside of the U.S. for a portion of my life, and both in Puerto Rico and in Mexico. And by the way, they speak the same language, but very different cultures. And what I have found is that when you've done business outside the U.S. and now you've interacted with different groups of people, you realize the amazing difference in perspective that being in one place versus the other can bring. And I remember specific examples of innovation that came from the fact that people in another geography or in another situation were looking at a problem differently. I simply think over the long term, the real long-term benefit is really innovation. If an organization has the openness to embrace different points of view, it's going to position itself for greater innovation. That's my view, and I've seen it, at least anecdotal evidence, that's the case. I think that's part of the longer term case for why this matters.
Yes, I think you see that sort of the approaches that we take, and I think it was Dan, you talked about the fact that you can look at sort of the different cultural approaches or different personality approaches, and that really changes the structure of how one views how you can interact and bring talent to the fore. And it also gives a completely different perspective to problem solving. I mean, we see it even for sort of like the practical solutions to certain things, because people haven't had that much resources to be able to, so they've had to come up with pragmatic and practical solutions versus people who like to sort of, have resources and can throw resources at the problem. It's a very eye-opening experience. I mean, I personally have had to navigate multiple cultures because I'm foreign as well. And it's just a very different thing. And in a way you sort of, you adapt, and you can adapt easily to situations. It doesn't have to be cultures. You can adapt easily to different groups, and you can adapt to sort of the problem that is in front of you. And those are very great kind of competencies that are definitely helping us. So I want to go for a moment to the chat as well. So one of the questions is about the support structure, availability of mentors to help the individuals navigate their career. How do we actually sort of think about, what are some of the other organizational structures? Have you seen mentoring programs or benefited? I mean, Efrain, you talked about it takes a group, we talk about it takes a village. What are the ways in which an organization can make that effective? Because there are a lot of times when mentoring programs or these infrastructures fall flat, they don't really kind of, not because of a goodwill, but because we just don't know how to kind of utilize them very well.
I'll weigh in, and I'm sure that the other panelists have their points. I would say this from this perspective, Sevin. I believe deeply that if I got to where I got, it's my responsibility to give back. So I have a standing rule that I don't think I violated. I would say that if anyone wants my time, my door is open. Just get on my calendar and let's talk. And I have been very involved in mentoring almost anyone who is interested in doing it. So I would say the first thing is there needs to be some openness, certainly at senior level ranks. But beyond that, I do think formal mentorship programs can be really helpful. And I would urge people to ask about that, because especially for students of color, for diverse candidates, those things can be really, really helpful in navigating the culture. I like to joke that I'm tricultural. So US, Latinx, and corporate. I know corporate culture. I think Justin was talking earlier about there is a rhythm to the way certain companies operate. American Express is probably very different than JP Morgan. Understanding that and understanding how to influence in that environment. I think Daniel talked a little bit earlier about styles. That's really important. So I would say two things. If many of the people hearing land in the position of their interest and desire, be a mentor also, but ask whether those programs actually exist.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's another question, and I'm going to throw this one at our almost to graduate students over here, to Dan and Justin as well. The pandemic, we work from home, we work remotely. On the one hand, it has created a lot of opportunities of access for people, let's say, who don't necessarily have the ability to travel for recruiting events, travel to sort of sample and do certain things. But it's also sort of changed the conversation in the office environments, right? It's, we talked about people having a seat at the table. Now we can't really even see, unless we're invited to that Zoom link, who's at the table. So Dan and Justin, maybe Justin, I'll start with you. And you lived through 1 year of your MBA program, more than 1 year of your MBA program being remote as well, to a large extent. So how have these things changed, and especially with respect to EDI?
I think that being in this virtual environment and being in the pandemic, in terms of EDI and just in general of communication, it really puts it on the person to be more proactive and really intentional about the conversations that that you're having and with the people that you're having it with. I know that one thing, even with recruiting, during my internship, and that was one thing that I really appreciated about American Express, was that they pride themselves on a coffee chat culture, and that is being able to communicate and set up time, and they foster that innovative spirit through conversation. And I was able to speak with anyone pretty much who I, sent an email to. And I thought that that was a great indicator that, they value my perspective. And also, I don't know if it was just me being an intern, but the fact of, I was able to have that interaction and visibility. And with that, I think that in the pandemic, when we talked about mentees and mentors, my motto, or I guess my mindset about this, is that mentors are sought after, like, being proactive, like you seek out your mentor, but mentees are chosen. Like these people who are mentors, who are in power, who do have the ability to kind of change the trajectory of your career, like they have in their mind, the type of, or just, it may be happenstance about, you come across a person and I choose you to be my mentor because I see something in you that that I can help you be successful. And so I think that in this virtual environment, it's very important for us to get outside of our comfort zones and put ourselves out there, because there are people who, one thing that I have noticed is that there are people who want to help, but they can't help if they don't know that I want to be helped. So I really think that in terms of the virtual environment and the pandemic, it has really opened up the platform for us to, have access to more people than we thought we had access to. And so I plan to continue to leverage that.
It's great advice, really is.
Yes, that certainly, it does, it does take some sort of courage and gumption to be able to do that, but to hear about kind of the positive experiences and some very deliberate attempts to make sure that that dialogue takes place, whether it's the coffee chats or some other sort of casual, less formal ways of getting folks together. Sounds like a very good plan. So I'll ask the very last question, and then we're out of time. I think we have room for one question from Renee Brown. How to navigate the process and conversation about bringing ideas about D&I to the senior leadership that we want to, Efrain, you talked about the fact that really needs to be buy-in and significant sort of voice from the senior leadership. And if the senior leadership is a little reluctant or at least a little skeptical or a little uncomfortable, are there ways we can navigate that?
My experience has been, and I don't know whether this is true, for some organizations, that's a very comfortable conversation to have, and for other organizations, it is not. I have friends who are consultants in the space, and I would say that if you can build the case in steps, if you can have the conversations, at least find the right people to have openness to the conversation and build the case, I would say in 75, 80% of the cases, you'll have a good outcome. It may take you longer than you want. That's not perhaps the best outcome, that it takes long, but I do think that I can think of, just off the top of my head, 2 or 3 organizations that have gone through that journey that started with a set of conversations that began to build the case. And sometimes it's as simple as look at the workforce that you're either trying to attract or that you have. How can you make that more equitable? How can you make the senior ranks of the company more reflective of the people that you're actually managing? And other point is, I think we've been given an opportunity here with the challenge in terms of talent, and that's an important argument. I think that argument resonates at all levels of management these days.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I just wanted to thank all of you, our participants, as well as our, of course, panelists. Thank you, Efrain. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Justin, for being with us today. It was a pleasure, and we hope to continue the conversation, because I think we have a lot to learn, and we have also a lot to sort of accomplish and work on. So thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you.